Hello, my friends. I have got a great tutorial for you today. This is awesome. It's using Lambda together with DynamoDB. And why is this awesome? Well, let me show you a little screen share and I will explain. So a lot of websites today are built with microservices. That means that if you're looking at a page such as this one, then every single programmatically or dynamically oriented portion of the page could be written with a different API and database on the back end. So you could have like one API function on Amazon.com that handles search through a little JavaScript, and it would be just this little area. You could have another for example, Lambda function with DynamoDB on the back end for this. You could have another Lambda function with DynamoDB on the back for that. And what's really awesome about all this is that basically every time you use Lambda plus DynamoDB, for most people, it's practically infinitely scalable and relatively cheap. So if you are willing to cobble together a website with lots of little microservices, it's amazing what you can do with that. All right, so let me move on to the tutorial. So here's a written tutorial that I will include so that you can get access to it. Formally, this is within the portion of my class where we're covering DynamoDB, but before it was just using DynamoDB kind of in the abstract as a database tool, but this time I'm connecting it with Lambda, which is much more useful. All right, so the context for this particular problem is that we're imagining that the company, Paradise Donut Company, is that they have a whole bunch of sensor readings. So it could be fryer temperatures, could be light bulbs, like whatever it is. Well, I guess sensors is going to be temperature. So they have a bunch of sensors, and they're generating millions of readings all over the planet, all throughout the day, and they're going to use an API to both read information from their sensor database as well as to post records to that. And actually, we're going to show you how to do, and by we, I mean just me, all four operations: create, read, update, and delete of DynamoDB data through an API URL that talks to a Lambda function. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing we need to do is open up your AWS console, go to the DynamoDB dashboard, and then create a table. So however you want to do that, just find your way over to DynamoDB and click on any of the links that say create table. Now I've already got PDC sensor data in there, which is what you're going to create. Let me show you what we're going for before I show you a second example of this. So if I click on it and I say explore items, these are the items that we're going to be looking at. We're going to have, or we're going to create. We're going to have an ID, and it's a composite key. So what that means is like you're going to have this part, which represents a specific sensor in a particular building. So building 1, 2, 3, 4, sensor 1, building 1, 2, 3, 4, sensor 2. And then there's a timestamp that happens. So even though we repeat this sensor ID over and over and over again, the timestamp together with that creates a unique identifier every single time we create a record. And this is the timestamp is a timestamp from the epoch. So if you just look for epoch timestamps, if you put that into your browser search, you'll see where you can generate the number of seconds that have passed since 1970. And here's a measurement, which is supposed to be the temperature of the thing that you're measuring, and then what type of sensor it is. Now, in this case, it could be fryers, but at a given restaurant or location, it could also be, I don't know, the temperature in the building or in a room or whatever. So at any rate, the idea is that there could be millions and millions of these readings being generated. And so let's go ahead and build out this table real quick. So this is going to be a sensor. This one's going to be a string. This one's going to be a number. This one's going to be a number, and this one's going to be text. So let's go ahead and start to create that. So I'll go back over here to tables, create table. We're going to call this PDC sensor data 2, but you call it just no 2, just PDC sensor data. And for the partition key, we will call this sensor ID. And for the sort key, you'll put in timestamp. And we're going to leave that as a string, and we're going to make this a number. And I don't think we need anything else. So we'll just take the defaults on that for today. So do just what I did, except without a 2 on the end. And come to the end and click create. All right, now we need to add some items to this. This is probably going to get created relatively quickly. So I will, there's a couple different ways you can access it. So one way you can do this is just click on that checkbox and do actions and, well, I guess explore items, so be it. And then we're gonna do actions and then create item. So we will start making some entries. And so first I'll do B1234. So this naming convention allows me to refer to a particular building where there may be many sensors. And I'll do sensor number 1. And then I will use a timestamp such as 16548728112. And to create these, you could just go out to like epic101.com. And here's the number of seconds that have passed since 1970 on January 1st or something like that. All right, so that's how you can create these times and simulate this. Okay, we also are going to need a couple other things. So I'm going to need a number, and I'm going to call this measurement, and we'll say it's 180 degrees. And then the sensor type is going to be a string, and we'll say that this is, let's say, sensor type, and it's a fryer. And I say create item, and there it is. And I would like you to create another one right now. So I'll just pull this over. So do this one, sensor ID with these attributes, fryer and measurement. And if you'd like, you could do this several times. One of the easy ways to do this is if you do something like this. Click on there and do actions, duplicate item. So there's the same item. And let's just say that to get some additional items for your API to pull on later on, you could say, oh, it's going to be 179 degrees and it's 1 second later. And so you could do that. But also create this one right here where it's sensor ID number 2. So just make up a bunch of random measurements, a bunch of random timestamps, and then just make the sensor ID to be both this one as sensor 1 as well as sensor 2. You could probably get by with just 2 of them, like I've shown you there, but it's a little bit less exciting. So pause for a second and go ahead and do that. All right, next, let's go ahead and create a Lambda function. So I have opened up another tab, and you could use one tab, doesn't matter. And I'm going to create a function, and I'm going to call it sensor data API function, and I will use the latest node. And as far as some permissions go, let's see, I'm going to allow it to, well, let's see. I'm going to create a new role, and I will call it, that way I know what to clean up later on, sensor data API role. And this is, at the very least, this is going to give it permissions to talk to CloudWatch and do logging related to each of the activities that it performs as a Lambda function. And for policy templates, usually we just need access to to CloudWatch for logging. But in this case, we also want to talk to DynamoDB. So we're going to explicitly tell it that. And so I'm going to type in, So if I start typing in simple microservice permissions, DynamoDB, this is going to allow us to talk to another service within AWS. So Lambda is a service, DynamoDB is a service. If one service wants to talk to another, you have to give that particular service, and in this case, a single function, is going to be given permissions to talk to DynamoDB. Sort of like being a father. Don't talk to my daughter unless I give you permission. So use specific function. I will give you permission to talk to my DynamoDB database. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and click create. And if you're doing this for a course of mine, then there's a question for you to do in the lab. And this should be super quick. All right, so there's a little depiction of my function that really isn't interacting with anything, sending data to it, and it's not really sending any data out of it. But we also have down here just the basic function template that's there that doesn't really do anything. All right, so let's go ahead and I've got a block of code here. And so for this, you're going to have access to this. And so you will have access to this. So I want you to copy this code here. And after I've copy and pasted it, I will explain a little bit of it. And note right here, just this function called handler takes an event, doesn't really do anything with it, but it takes it. I'm going to paste this in, and I apologize that it's probably like super tiny on your screen. But let me go ahead and talk through, well, here, I'm going to use this screen because it seems to be a little bit bigger. So let's talk through what is in this function. Now, a Lambda function is just a Docker container that already is set up for your most favorite languages like Python or JavaScript, Node, whatever. And so in this one where it's a Node container, it already has a bunch of libraries that are pre-installed. And because we're working within the AWS environment, we're able to access some libraries in the AWS SDK. And let me just stop right there. If you want to use JavaScript or Node to interact with your DynamoDB table, then you need to just go out there and Google the AWS SDK, and there'll be a section on there for all of the commands, all of the function calls that will interact with DynamoDB. So I've done a lot of the work for you, but this is not like learning how to program class right here. This is a little bit of hand waving as I've already done the work for you, but I'll explain what it's done. So we've pulled out some libraries that's already installed, and we create an instance of a node object that can interact with DynamoDB. And here's the function, the main function. So it's got a handler, and I don't know why, but maybe it's just because I was using some other code and I adapted it. But instead of just event, it also passes in context. Context, if I recall correctly, is some information about the container that the Lambda function is running in, like how much memory is allocated and stuff like that. So you don't usually need to use that. The event is the thing that reads it's a JSON object that comes in from any source, whether it's API gateway or lots of other services in AWS that could call this. They each have their own JSON object storage that you could look up and just see the formatting of basically the name value pairs. But the name value pairs are different depending on what service is calling this function. And in this case, we're planning for DynamoDB. Okay, so we're telling this function that we're setting up a variable, but let's not worry about that too much. Here, in order to do this, the most correct thing to do would be to do one Lambda function for reading from the API, and then because we're potentially modifying a database on the back end, we should have another Lambda function for deleting stuff from DynamoDB, and another Lambda function for putting things or inserting things into DynamoDB. So, but for simplification of this tutorial, simplification in quotes, because it makes it a little bit more complicated, but a lot shorter. What I've done is I've put all 4 different functions in one function, or all 4 different types of handling into one single function. And so basically, if the API gateway in the future sends you some JSON text and the route key property contains something that looks like this, then it's going to, this is a switch statement, it's going to run this code. And if it sends in a statement in the route key property that looks like this, then we're going to do this code. And if it sends in something that looks like this, then we're going to run this code. And so it looks like basically all of the blocks of code, or many of them are a little bit longer than others. Let's just look at the most simple one of all so you get an idea of how the SDK works. So this just says that we're going to call this object that we just set up, and we're going to call its scan method, and we're going to pass into it something in curly braces, which is a table name. So what this is doing is this is how interacting through the SDK to DynamoDB works, is that you pass in things in curly braces. Up here, it looks a little bit more complicated. Here we've got a curly brace when you're getting a specific record that names in the curly braces, it names the table that you want to be querying, and then it sends in like which specific item or the two properties that make up the composite key. In this case right here, we're saying, hey, I only want to get back, I want to get back everything, and I'm not going to filter this in any way. So so this is the simplest example of all. Just return everything from a table with this name, put it as JSON in this variable, and then we're done. The other ones are a little bit more complicated. So we've got like the put example, we've got a delete example. So there's a .delete function, but in all cases, if you learn a little bit about the SDK and run through some examples, it's just a curly brace and some JSON data that allows you to do an operation. So what is in here are examples of create, read, update, and delete. So they're all in this code sample. And it's just really just to get you started on how this works. Okay, so this is here. We've pasted in our code. Let's click then the deploy button right here so that this becomes usable. All right, it says it has been updated, but did it deploy? No changes to deploy. Okay, we're in good shape. All right, now let's go to API Gateway. So we have a table, we have code that can interact with that table. Now we want to put an API or a URL in front of Lambda. So let's come over to here, and I'll type in again my console, and I will look for API Gateway. And I'm going to click on, make sure I don't already have one that is related to what we're doing here, sensor data. It doesn't look like it. So I will click Create API, and we want the HTTP API. And so the idea that we're going for here is that from within a web page potentially, or from a computer program, you could reach out to a specific URL, the one we're about to create, and you could just say, give me back all the items, or delete a particular item, and you pass in the ID of the item that you want to delete, or you could say put an item, and you can use that URL to add a record to the table, and it's all going to pass through one URL with some additional resource information on the end that is going to determine whether you're reading, updating, deleting, etc. So we're going to make basically the stub of our URL first and call that an API. All right, so I'm going to click build there. And let's see, oh, we need to name it. So PDC sensor data API. We will click next, and we're going to be, this is where we can configure routes. We are going to come back to this. And then we could do stages, and we will click next, and we will just click create. Okay, so by default, we're now looking at the routes area. And so we want to account for being able to go to this URL, and we can actually see more information about it right there. If we click on it, eventually we'll see the full URL we created. But what we want is we want to define different paths off of our main URL or API that define the ability to create, read, update, or delete. And so let's go over to here first. And this is our URL. We're calling it an endpoint as well. It's our API, but by itself, when you use API Gateway, it's not going to be useful. We have to add in some additional route information or some path information that's going to come on the end there. Another word for this is they can call it the invoke URL. And so this is where you have another task to do if you're doing this for my class. So look in the lab and save your URL as question number 2. Okay, so now we have to create routes. And let me show you what we're going for here. We need to have a way to basically do our URL / the word items, and it'll return everything. We need to have a way to do / items and then a specific sensor ID and get back that. And actually, I misnamed it a little bit there because technically the way I use this in here is not just the sensor ID like B1234, but I'm actually looking for a specific reading. So I've got it misnamed a little bit. So I actually want a particular record, a particular entry, not all records that are part of sensor ID. We also want to be able to have people go / items and then that particular reading and potentially delete that record. So we want to get, go to this URL / this and see all the items, see a single item, delete a single item, or add an item. And it may not be obvious, but whenever you're browsing around on the web, every time you visit a page or you hit the search button or whatever, there's some additional text being sent to the URLs that you're visiting. And in that text, it's the HTTP header information, you're also sending in the word get, put, or delete. And also, especially when you're talking about APIs, you can simulate all of this or you can do all this functionality with computer-to-computer communication. I'm not sure if what I just said makes sense to you, but if you just visit a URL, that's we call the get method. But you could also just from JavaScript in a page say, here's some code in JavaScript. Go and visit a URL and pull back its data. Or for some JavaScript in a page, go out or even just some backend code like Java or C#. You could say, go out to a URL, use a particular method, and the API will know what to do with it. So basically, we're creating 4 routes, and the routes are consisted of the path or the URL information plus some additional text, which you usually don't see, which is the method. It's either a get or a put or a delete method. So, all right, let's build our routes. So on the left-hand portion of our page, let us go over to routes. And let's go ahead and create a route for selecting a single item through our API. So we're going to click create, and we're going to say using the get method, anytime somebody types in items / and this is kind of like a variable, sensor ID. So anyway, this will be one of the routes that they can choose. All right, and let's do this a couple more times. We'll say create, and we want to do get, and if they say I want all items, this will be another route that they could do. And if now it kind of does it interesting, this little tree thing that it does. Let's do put. So if we're sending items to that URL, and then lastly, we want to try out delete, and that's going to look like this. Items, sensor ID. So this is what it looks like after we set up 4 different routes. So our API with its invoke URL with these type of things appended to it with different methods is now ready to receive some communication, but we need to set up something called an integration, which is when somebody visits that API and they hit a particular route, where does the data go? What happens next? And the integration means we connect it with our Lambda function. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead. Well, one way I can get to this is I can just click on integrations right here, and I will select, let's go with the get. And where would I like this to go? I would like it to go to this function that I created over here. So let's watch how we do that. Create and attach an integration. So I select that integration type, Lambda function, and in the drop down right there, it's already listed. And so we don't really care about some of this unique identifier stuff. This is good enough. And I don't think I need to add anything else. I think we're good. So I will click create, and it is good to go. Now we need to do this for, oh, and notice that it says, hey, this route right here is attached to an AWS Lambda function. So let's go ahead and do this for our others. Now, so I'll click on put. I'll click, well, I could click there or I could do here, either one. Anyway, choose an existing integration. Yes, I will connect there and I will say attach. Now, normally, like I said, you would have a different Lambda function for each thing, but rather than writing 4 different Lambda functions, I just put all the code into one Lambda function with a switch statement. So if you're moderately good at programming, you'd know enough about how to break this up into 4 different functions and just take each case and put it, it's basically the same code, but you just have a different function name, and you would just take the text of this and put it in a much smaller function. Okay, anyway, back to this. Let's go over to delete, and we'll attach it, and we will do get, and we will attach it. Nice. Now we've created really all 3 parts. We've got a database, we've got a Lambda function, we've got an API, and it's now set up so if you visit the API on a number of different URLs or paths or routes, it will redirect it to the request to the right Lambda function for handling. All right, so we're good to go. All right, let's go ahead and test all of this. So I'm going to go over here to, there's a number of different places I could go. I could click right there, or I could click right here. Doesn't matter. So here's my APIs, and here's this, and I click on it. Well, I guess we're taking the long route to get there. And we click on it, and this is our invoke URL. And so what happens if I copy this and I put it in a URL? Or in a web browser, it doesn't do anything because it's expecting some additional information. We haven't created a route for the API with nothing after it, but we have done it for pasting in the word items. So if I type in items, see what happens. Yes, it works. So awesome. Now, mine is connected to a table that has more information than yours, but I already made a whole ton of entries in there, and I showed you that at the beginning of this. And so if you're doing this for my class, you have a little task to do for the quiz related to this step. Okay, let's try another one. Let's try doing items / B1234, and then I did S1. Okay, so that would be for sensor 1. And then I have a letter T in there so I can put in the timestamp 16548722812. So basically, if you go and you type in, take your URL, type in items, and then type in this, the letter T, and then the timestamp information for that record. So we're trying to pull up a single record. And let's see, and it looks like it worked correctly. So I have some Lambda code that is expecting something in this format, and it goes to DynamoDB and it pulls out a single record. And there it is. Nice. Okay, so you have another task to do if you're doing this for an assignment in my class. Okay, now to do posting, like adding information and deleting. Usually we do this with programming code, but you can simulate that on your computers by using a terminal window and a program called curl, which is likely installed. So I am going to copy and paste this block of code, and then I'll talk through it. So paste. And so this one is doing a put method, if you notice that. And did I get everything there? Okay, let me get rid of this URL here at the end, because this is one from a previous example. And what we need is the current invoke URL. And that is basically this. Oops. This followed by items. So it looks complicated, but what we're saying here is call through curl, go out to this URL and do a put method on it. And then with the -d, here is a JavaScript object in curly braces that we're sending in and then the backslashes is just to cancel out the quotes, but we're sending in a sensor ID, a timestamp, a measurement, blah, 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 blah. So notice that this is going to be, let's see, a timestamp that ends in 814. And let's just see if I have that in here right now. So I'm going to come over to this and I'm going to explore the items. Do I have one that ends in 814? No, I do not. All right, so let's see what happens if I do this. Okay, the last statement there said put, which probably means that it worked. An HTTP 200 message coming back is, by the way, this is the kind of information up here that usually is going back and forth from your browser that you don't usually get to see. Okay, so it looks like it successfully got added. So let's go ahead and just run this one more time. So we're looking for 814. Oops. Oh, I didn't like that. All right, let's try that. Let me just do this one more time. PDD sensor data, and I'll do a scan, and I'll run. And now it says 814 is in there. Sweet. So this one URL, by appending the right things to it and doing the right method on it, is doing all of the traffic control that we want. The next thing that and right now you have another task to do if you're doing this for an assignment in my class. Now we want to do the last item, which is delete. So that's going to look like this. And so I will, again, come over here to the console terminal window. I'll paste that in. So the item number there is going to be correct, but the URL is not. So let me find my invoke URL one more time. Copy. Paste. All right, looking good. Let's go ahead and try this one. And it sent me back a text message. And we got some status message of 200, which is a success in HTTP. So let's go ahead and see if we really did lose an item that ended in 814. Okay, so before there was 814. So let's go ahead and do our scan one more time. And it is done. Nice. Okay, so if you're doing this for my class, then you probably want to enter in a question that I have for you in the tutorial. Okay, I need an extra second here. I could pause, but I'll just kind of go in real time. Okay, so at this point, you could say the tutorial is quasi done if you just want to learn how this works. But I have an additional section here, which is let's add in an HTML page to this. I'm not going to do like the delete and the put options, but I would like to do the read options and show you how the fetch JavaScript URL command, fetch JavaScript URL function will allow you to interact with your API. So in order to do that, it's going to take me a second here, so be patient. I don't want to stop and then start again. I'm going to create a temporary folder on my computer, and so you can do the same right now. I'm going to call it sensor data, and I'm going to go into that. Okay, so on my computer, I have created a sensor data folder, and I have it basically in a to delete folder. All right, and now I'm going to put code. Now you can use any text editor that you want. I'm going to do VS Code. So I open up code, and I'm going to say open, and I'm going to go to my delete folder, and there's my sensor data. And now I'm ready to start adding in HTML pages. So this is an empty folder, and I've installed the plugin or the extension called Live Server. So if you haven't done that, you'll want to do that. So that's that. It's ready. It's already installed for me. Because when you make HTML pages on your computer, sometimes when you're developing locally, you can just make an HTML page and double click on it, and it'll open it up in your browser, and it'll say something like file colon blah blah blah, and it'll show the path to it. But when interacting with APIs, frequently they don't want, like API Gateway frequently will not want to talk to you unless you're making a call out of your HTML page from something that looks like a real server and not a local hard drive. There's reasons for that related to security. And so to honor their intention to make us do things securely over the web, we need to basically run our HTML pages on a real web server. So you could just throw these HTML pages up on anything like Nginx or Apache somewhere on the web with a real URL, just throw it in a folder on a server, or just install live server on here and we can simulate that and get all the same permissions. Okay, now, before we create our HTML pages, let's go over here to API Gateway, and we need to enable cores. And so in order to do that, let's go over here, cores for our particular API. And basically, I'm going to say all these things are allowed. So I'm not going to go into explanation. So star, star, those three things I think are all I need. And then I will click save. I won't go into the details of that, but that's permissions stuff we need to make it so that we can call our API from HTML pages. Okay, so we're going to create an HTML page called readallitems.html. And so I'm going to copy this and put it in here. And I will call this read all items HTML, something like that. Doesn't matter too much what you call it. I copy and paste. Let me shrink this up, and then let me talk through what we're seeing on the page. So the HTML is very small. In the body tag, you just have a paragraph tag, and it has an ID that we can reference so that we can basically put displayable stuff on the page. And then, oh, and there's also a button. And if you click on the button, it calls a JavaScript function. Here's the JavaScript function. And what the JavaScript function does is it reaches out to your API URL. And we need to update this because this is unique every time we do it. It's going to reach out to this API URL, and so it's going to get back some data. And then with that data, I'm going to send it to this other function that I wrote, which is basically, it's just a loop. And it just loops through the JSON object that's there. So you're going to, if you remember seeing this in the web page, it looked, click back a couple times, it looked like that. So you got a whole bunch of sensor IDs that are each in curly braces. They're each JSON objects. So we're basically going to loop through each one of those things that came down and then append to this particular paragraph tag. So if you want to look at the code later, you can. Just with inner HTML, we're writing to that thing over and over and over again and adding a line break. So I hit save, and and it would not work if I tried to run it right now. So let me once again go back and get my invoke URL, which is right there. Copy. And I'm going to put that right here. Paste, save, and I believe I am ready to run this now. So I can come down here and click Go Live, and it opens up a page, and it's just got technically an empty paragraph tag and this button. And when I click this button, it's going to try to reach out to the API and retrieve all of the JavaScript. Wait, I feel like I did something wrong. Sorry, even before, look, it's probably going to break right now. Watch, I'm going to click this and like nothing happened. Yeah, because I knew that was going to happen. Oh, wait, no, it did work. Cool. Well, let me just look at this one more time. How did that work? Sorry, I know I'm being silly here. Like, you wrote the code. Yeah, I did. I just remember that. Oh, so this part right here, here's what I was getting hung up on for a second. I was like, I know if you visit that by itself, it doesn't return all items. But right here, I take that variable, I add in /items, and then it makes the call. Okay. So basically it visited the /items version of our URL exactly like this, and it got back this data, and then I used a little JavaScript to make it look nice. All right. And let's do another one now where we're similar code, but we're just going to pull back one record. So I'm going to come over here and create another one and call it read one item.html. And here's our code. All right, let's see how this one looks different. Oh, let's not forget to add this in. All right, so come back over to here once again. Get the right, oops. Just right click on there, copy, come over here, paste, and save. So let's just see what this one does. Similar setup, just two pieces of HTML on the page. We're going to be writing to this HTML element. This time, I've hard-coded in the record that I want to delete, just to simplify, I suppose. And so when we click the button right here, it is going to go out to there. Oh, and it's going to try to go to /items composite key. So we're basically saying items, and I don't know if sorry, I'm getting lost in my head. Did I say we're going to delete something? No, we're not deleting something. We're looking for a particular item, and we're going to look for items and then that particular item right there. And we've already confirmed in a browser URL that this works, but this time we're doing it programmatically. And when we pull down that one item, we don't really need a loop this time. So we're just getting one thing back and we just write it to the page. So it's just so this is just basically a simplified version of this. It's just not in a loop. So let me hit stop there, and I'm going to run this again. And I'm going to click the button, show one sensor item. It goes out, it brings it back, and it displays it on the page. Ooh, looks like we've got some other good stuff to do here. Okay, a little bit more. You're like, well, how would I save an item? Okay, save one item.html. Do this. I'm copying from another window. And so it's right here. I just copied this block. You can probably imagine what's coming. We need, before we do anything with this, we need to update that URL again. Here, I'll grab it from this page. Oops. What's it doing? Okay. Terrible clicking, terrible clicking. Okay, we come out to here. Paste. All right, so let's see what we have here. Oh, it looks like I created a form where I'm reading a set of values. And it says, hey, the timestamp has to be unique each time you submit this. And so basically all it does is read from the form, and then it does the fetch function, except instead of get, this time it's put, and we send it some JSON data, and then we will read back the response we get from the server. So I go live, and I don't know if I have 814 in there right now. So let me just check. It looks like 814 is not in there currently. So it would be safe to try to write that again. So here we go. Add item to the table. And it says I successfully put it there. And we could verify that by coming out over to here, the read all items. And somewhere in here, we should see 814. So it successfully made it in. I can't remember if I wrote a delete page as well. So let's go see if I did that. Yes, I did. So just in case you're working on projects and you feel like you need all of the HTML functionality to create, read, update, delete records on the back end, then let's go ahead and round this out. So I will say delete one item.html, and here is going to be the code. And we're almost at the end if you're following along. So I paste this in. Let's go ahead and grab this URL again, the API URL, update this. Paste, save. All right, so let's see what we have here. We have a form where you enter in something, and I pre-filled a value there. Yeah, I pre-filled some values, but you could update them. We'll see that in a second. And then there's a button that says delete an item. So when you click that button, it's going to create a couple variables from the form, and then it's going to use the fetch method to run the delete method that's going to send over along with some basically the four variables we had there, and then we'll read back the response from the server. So I will hit stop. I will hit go. Here's something that we want to delete. So we click delete. And we get back a message from the API saying that it was successfully deleted. Yes. So everything worked perfectly today. We're very happy. So importantly, you've learned how to do all the CRUD operations using Lambda and DynamoDB. So you can create, read, update, and delete records using API Gateway, Lambda, and DynamoDB using the SDK. And you've got some good code to work with and modify now. So let's go ahead and delete our resources that we used. So start over here, and I'll just grab this one that I was working with. I need to delete this thing. All right, let me just click on it. Okay, so I'll click on tables, click that, and I'll say delete. And delete all the alarms. Nope, I don't want to backup. So I'll just say confirm. All right, it's gone. Let's go over to our API. So I know I've got it in another tab, but I'll just do it this way anyway. API gateway. We'll find this API that we worked so hard on, and we will click delete, and we will type confirm. Now let's find our Lambda function, which we worked really hard to copy and paste from my example, I know. That's funny, I got a typo. Sensor data, actions, delete function. I will say delete. All right, we got a couple more things, two more things to delete. So if we go to CloudWatch, you're like, but we never used CloudWatch, but we would if we were debugging our function and having problems. So we'll go to log groups and we will find sensor data API function, and we will delete that log group. So every time the function ran, it made an entry in there. And then lastly, let's go to IAM, Identity and Access Management. We'll go to roles. I will type in sensor data API role and click delete. That makes us write it. And we do that. And we are done. All right. You are awesome. Have a fantastic day. I hope this helps you out in the things that you're working on in your life. Take care. Bye.